LeGarde and friends are traveling through the ancient city of Mahabre, but make the crucial mistake of leaving the girl alone with the Cube of the Depths for 3 seconds. In that time, she has managed to chew, maul, and completely reprogram the cube. Instead of getting sent to 1590 Mahabre, the group are sent to modern-day New York. So what do they do now? Darcy's reaction can be used as a microcosm for the reaction of everyone else, mostly because she isn't really that surprised. At the end of the day, these guys have survived the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger and the ancient city of Mahabre, and spoilers for later in the game, but even when they're in the void, in the presence of the oldest of the old gods, Darce just gets right back up and continues walking. These guys have already been through so much that they wouldn't really be that surprised by the initial strangeness of where they are. If anything, they might even feel a little relieved since they won't have to smell the disgusting dungeon, instead only having to smell New York. One thing that would quickly become a problem for them though is language. We know from dialogue that LeGarde and friends can in fact speak with the citizens of Mahabre. This could either be done through some universal language like Latin, or through some kind of magical translator. Any sort of magic doesn't really work in this setting since the only thing magical about New York are the poverty rates. This leaves only one other option, to just speak whatever the language they know and hope someone else understands them. Darce is the most immediately screwed over in this kind of setting since the only two languages she knows, Rondonian and Latin, aren't really spoken at all. Rondonian, as discussed in a different video of mine, is some kind of English-French hybrid language. Darce would probably recognize a couple words, but not really understand anything. And Latin is practically pointless since the only place where Latin is readily spoken is inside churches by specific people, which is probably where Darce is going to end up considering how religious she is. But that brings us to another problem, discrimination. But not necessarily in the way we know it today. At the time Fear and Hunger takes place historically, discrimination was majoritively religiously based, and the ideas of races at the time were used to describe specifically where people were from. But don't get me wrong, these guys aren't progressive in the slightest. Being the wrong kind of Christian would get you killed at this time. So I bet you can imagine what they thought of other religions, which means that Darce's stop at a church can only really go one of two ways. Either she leaves having made a new friend in someone who has similar ideas to her, or she is escorted out after screaming at a priest for being a heretic. God only knows what she would do if she met a Catholic. But if all goes well, that marks the end of Darce's story. She spends the rest of her days in the church and learns more about the big city and the place she's found herself in. We probably might even get a Lovecraft effect where over time, by being exposed to new things, she would slowly become more and more moderate. But Darce's story isn't universal. Kahara would have a much different story. Kahara has the advent of speaking a pretty well-known language. Using my own video as a source again, Kahara speaks some form of Arabic, and Arabic isn't just a sweet spot for languages, being rare enough that speaking it can form a connection between people, while not being so rare that it's impossible to find anyone who speaks it. And we know that, canonically, Kahara had put all of his points into charisma. I can definitely see him convincing someone to let him work for them. His story ending with him working in a halal meat store, making a modest $18 an hour. Up next is the girl, who's difficult to figure out how her story would end since her story is just starting. But we can guess a couple of things about her. For one, her experiences with the eldritch horrors of the dungeon have made her almost completely immune to the horrors of the New York subway system. She would probably adapt most quickly since, unlike everyone else, she doesn't really have a solid grasp of how reality is supposed to work. And assuming that she goes with Kahara, she'll probably spend her days learning American Sign Language and getting lots of much needed therapy. Next is LeGarde, who's almost impossible to predict. The first few days would be spent trying to get back to Mahabre, but after that I'm not really sure. Maybe he would attempt traveling to London, assuming that it's a mistranslation of Rondon, or maybe he would stab someone over a half-eaten slice of pizza. One way or another, I just have a hunch that he'll end up in prison. Finally is Ragnvaldir, who is escaping New York and fleeing north to live the rest of his days out in the forests of Vermont. Another option being that he comes across the Swedish consulate. Noticing the flag, he enters and is able to explain his situation to someone, only to be promptly escorted out and institutionalized. Something similar could also happen to Darce with the Danish consulate, considering how Denmark and Rondon seem to share similar flags, with only the colors being inverted. By the end of it all, Darce is the average nun, Ragnvaldir is in Vermont, Kahara is making decent money and taking care of his kid, LeGarde somehow manages to get into prison, and the girl becomes a successful rap artist. Anyways, that's it. That's the entire video. I can't wait for people to start writing 10-hour-long thesis papers in the comments over that one dumb joke I made about New York poverty rates. Anyway, my bad for not uploading for a while. If you have any ideas for videos, please tell me. I am running out of them. Okay, later.